little more than a list, but I have one or two things to say on exoticism. I see Roddy back there, an exotic figure in himself. The word exotic originates from the Greek, exotikos, and it means foreign, ultimately stemming from exo, meaning outside. And we open tonight with Kennst du das Land, one of the greatest poems in the German language. It comes from Wilhelm Meister's Lehrjahre, and it's sung by Mignon. She's been abducted from Italy, her homeland. She's in Germany, languishing, part of a theatrical troupe, and she longs for her homeland. And this poem is what's called in German a Steigerung. It's a gradual intensification. The first verse, she thinks of the country, kennst du das Land? The second verse, she thinks of the house where she used to play, the Palladian-like house, kennst du das Haus? And in the third verse, she imagines the mountains over which she must pass in order to get back to her homeland. And of course, there's a refrain each time. She addresses it to Wilhelm Meister. He's an older man. She's in love with him. He is not in love with her. And in the first verse, she calls him mein Geliebter, my lover, which he's not. And then in the second verse, she calls him mein Beschützer, my protector, because he actually bought her freedom and protected her. And this is a gift for any singer. In the last verse, it's this wonderful open A, O Vater, lass uns ziehen. And just linger for a moment on that last phrase, lass uns ziehen, let us go. The sibilants are so important, let us go. It's a remarkable song. It's been set by almost all the great Lieder composers. The greatest, whatever that means, setting is probably by Hugo Wolf. You probably know it. But this, I think, runs it close, Schubert's setting, in a different way. It's more modest and perhaps more suitable for a 13-year-old to sing. The original key was A major, and that made it really quite difficult for sopranos because of the high tessitura. The reason why in the Nachlass it was actually changed to F major. It's a great poem, and I think Schubert's setting is actually one of the most, it's not one of the most spectacular, but in the last verse he goes to the minor, which Beethoven doesn't in his setting, which Schubert perhaps knew. We then come on to Brown, William Dennis Brown. Oh, just one more thing. There are stage directions in the novel of how Mignon used to sing this. And it's perhaps of interest to audiences and indeed singers and pianists. She began each verse with a certain solemn grandeur, as if she were drawing attention to something unusual and imparting something of importance. When she reached the third line, the voice became more somber and gloomy. The words, kennst du es wohl, do you know it, were given mystery and weight. The dahin, dahin was suffused with irresistible longing, and she knew how to vary lass uns ziehen each time it was repeated, so that one time it was entreating and urgent, the next time pressing and full of promise. William Dennis Brown, he was a close friend of Rupert Brooke. Brown went up to Clare College, Cambridge, in 1907, where he formed friendships with a lot of musicians like Vaughan Williams, Edward Dent. Indeed, he was a member of the chorus in the Cambridge University production of The Wasps, for which, as you know, Vaughan Williams wrote the incidental music. Though he matriculated in greats, he was soon devoting all his energies to music and became an organ scholar at his college. He gave the first London performance of Berg's Piano Sonata. and was killed in the Gallipoli campaign on June the 4th, soon after he had buried Rupert Brooke on the island of Skyros. He was only 26. He didn't write much. There's some church music, there's some orchestral dances, there's a piano piece, there's a choral setting of Tennyson's The Kraken, an unfinished ballet, and 11 songs. And the four greatest, the last four, are right up there with the very best of all English song. There's the epitaph on Salathiel Pavey by Johnson. There's Lovelace's To Gratiana Dancing and Singing, which is one of my favourite songs. And then Constable's Diaphenia and de la Mare's Arabia. And in these, his extraordinary promise is manifested. His setting of Arabia, which we're going to hear, was composed in 1914, on the 22nd of June, just 6 weeks before the outbreak of World War I. It's the earliest known setting of de la Mare, a poet who has been prodigiously set by song composers. According to Gooch and Thatcher, there have been more settings of de la Mare than those of any other English poet. The final three lines of de la Mare's Arabia run like this, and it's very relevant because it's about exoticism. Cold voices whisper and say, he is crazed with the spell of far Arabia. They have stolen his wits away. And the exoticism and dreaminess of de la Mare's poem is reflected in the Debussy-like harmonies of the music. And the closing two bars are extraordinary. They're marked P, 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 and they vanish into thin air. We turn now to Arthur Bliss, whose 70 or so songs were composed before, during, and after. Seems to have gone off. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Before the two world wars. Bliss fought at the front, was gassed, witnessed the death in battle of many comrades, and unlike Brown, survived. In 1940, he attended the premiere of his piano concerto in New York, and whilst there, it's gone off again, I think, cut off by the outbreak of the Second World War, he composed his 7 American poems, 5 of which are settings of one of my favorite poets, Edna Vincent Millay. Millay won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1923 and was greatly admired by Thomas Hardy, who wrote that America has 2 great attractions, the skyscraper and the poetry of Edna Vincent Millay. She's best known for her sonnets, and perhaps you know one of the great poems, I think, of the 20th century, What Lips My Lips Have Kissed, that Leonard Bernstein set in his Songfest. Siege, the one we're going to hear, is shorter and comes from a collection called The Harp Weaver and Other Poems, first published in 1922. The poet describes herself as a madwoman who attempts to keep death at bay by surrounding herself with exotic baubles, jade, a Hindu idol, a Chinese god, carved beads, a lotus pod. And by fingering such baubles, she tries to ward off, I quote, death beating the door in. Wonderfully portrayed by Bliss's allegro agitato accompaniment, bristling with Makati. Having lived an adventurous life, Edna Vincent Millay, she was an ardent feminist and openly bisexual. She eventually succumbed to alcoholism and died alone, falling down the stairs in her home and breaking her neck in the fall. She was 58. In a poem called First Fig, she wrote her own eloquent epitaph. My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night, but my foes and my friends, it gives a lovely light. We go now to Rebecca Clark, A Dream. It sets a poem by W.B. Yeats from The Rose, an early collection, many of which of the poems deal with his unrequited love for Maud Gonne. Yeats met her in 1889 and describes this remarkable woman in his autobiography. I quote, "She seemed a classical impersonation of the spring. Her complexion was luminous, like that of apple blossoms through which the light falls. And I remember her standing that first day by a great heap of such blossoms in the window. She was 6 feet tall, one of the most celebrated beauties in Ireland, and a great advocate of revolution against English rule. Yeats worshipped her, treated her as an exotic being, but she never reciprocated his love. The original title of this poem, which is called here A Dream of Death, was simply an epitaph. It was written during Maud Gonne's recovery in France from an illness, and according to Yeats, a malicious woman told him, "So, Maud Gonne is dying in the south of France." Rebecca Clark called her song A Dream and made many, many alterations to the original text. But here is the original poem, because I think it's worth reciting. It's called A Dream of Death. I dreamed that one had died in a strange place, near no accustomed hand, and they had nailed the boards above her face, the peasants of that land, wandering to lay her in that solitude, and raised above her mound a cross they made out of 2 bits of wood, and planted cypress round, and left her to the indifferent stars above, until I carved these words: she was more beautiful than thy first love, but now lies under boards. Thy first love, I think, refers to the reader's first love. We now come to what my parents regarded as the most wonderful song ever, and I love it too, Amy Woodford Finden's Kashmiri song from 4 Indian love lyrics, perhaps the most popular of the songs this evening. This is what the Radio Times had to say in the 1920s. If sales are any criterion of popularity, the most popular song ever published in the history of music are the Indian love lyrics. It will suffice to keep her memory green as long as there is a music lover left to sing her songs or a band to play them. You remember the poem. I won't read the middle verse, which Woodford Finden leaves out. Pale hands I kissed beside the Shalimar. Where are you now? Who lies beneath your spell? Whom do you lead on rapture's roadway far before you agonize them in farewell? Pale hands pink-tipped, like lotus bloods that float on those cool waters where we used to dwell. I would have rather felt you round my throat, crushing out life, than waving me farewell. The Shalimar in Sanskrit means an abode, hall of love. And the Shalimar Bagh in a Mughal garden that originated in the 2nd century. It was built by Pravasena II, who, when he founded the city of Srinagar, had a cottage built at the northeastern corner of the lake and named it Shalimar. A channel connects the garden to the lake. Just a brief word on Amy Woodford Finden, because I think she's really interesting. She was born Amelia Ward, one of 9 children, 5 of whom survived. Her father, an American, was British consul in Chile, and he moved to South Kensington when his wife died. Amy studied composing at the age of 9, and she published her first works under the name of Ward. She spent 3 years in India, where she married a medical officer who had also served with Colonel Nicholson, the husband of Lawrence Hope. On her return to England, she wrote to the publishers of Hope's The Garden of Karma, asking permission to set the poems to music. Back came the lapidary reply, yes, with pleasure. No fee, Lawrence Hope. The resulting 4 Indian love lyrics have remained her most popular work, although there are similar cycles such as On Yelum River, A Lover in Damascus, and 5 Little Japanese Songs. No less a singer than Dame Clara Butt sang Pale Hands I Loved with enormous success. Woodford Findon is buried in Yorkshire, and her memorial shows her recumbent, full-length figure carved in marble. And Lawrence Hope is interesting too. She was born Adela Corey. She joined her parents at the age of 16 in Karachi, where she worked on her father's newspaper, and she married Colonel Malcolm Nicholson. Much of her poetry, as you'll hear this evening, because also set by our last composer, Burley, it has a mildly exotic, if you like, erotic quality, sort of soft porn, really. And The Garden of Karma, when published in 2001, met with instant success. She and her husband were feted by London society, especially after the publication of Woodford Findon's 4 Indian love lyrics. After the birth of a child, Hope and her husband, now a general, left their baby with relatives and returned to India, where her husband died from a prostate operation in Madras. Heartbroken, Lawrence Hope committed suicide 2 months after her husband's death and was buried next to him in Madras. The exoticism of Kashmiri song is conveyed by Woodford Findon's pentatonic prelude at the beginning. 2 songs now by Henri Duparc, settings of the great 19th century poet Charles Baudelaire. You probably know all this, but Duparc's output is exiguous, 17 songs only and 1 duet, and on them rests his reputation as one of the greatest composers in the entire history of the Mélodie. They were composed between the ages of 20 and 37, after which he lived for another 48 years without publishing and hardly writing another note. Unlike Fauré, 3 years his senior, who by the age of 20 had already produced a fair corpus of juvenile songs, Duparc's first Mélodie, from Chanson Triste onwards, revealed his fully developed genius. We're going to hear too, L'Invitation au Voyage was composed during the Siege of Paris in 1871. It was later orchestrated by Duparc, but this version, to me, lacks the bright quality of the piano accompaniment, which exploits to perfection the sonorities of the instrument, especially in the vibrant oscillation of the open fifths and the way they contrast with the utter stillness of the refrain. There's something maniacal about Duparc's expression of this nostalgia, akin to Wolf's treatment of Mignon's Kennst du das Land. Baudelaire's middle stanza, which describes a Dutch interior of gleaming furniture, rich ceilings, deep mirrors, and scents of flowers and amber, was clearly too domestic for Duparc's visionary setting and was therefore omitted. Baudelaire's poem was inspired by the actress Marie Daubrun. And in 1851, he wrote these words to her, in English first. Through you, Marie, I shall be strong and great. Like Petrarch, I shall immortalize my Laura, be my guardian angel, my muse and my Madonna, and lead me along the paths of the beautiful. Soyez mon ange gardien, ma muse et ma Madone, et conduisez-moi dans la route du beau. Fine words, but there was no lasting satisfaction from their relationship, which remained, I think, platonic. She was far more interested in Baudelaire's friend, the poet Théodore de Bonville, and it was with him that she eloped to the exotic climes described in L'Invitation Voyage. I think much of the exoticism of this wonderful poem is conveyed by Baudelaire's use of what Verlaine called l'impair, the alternation of lines of 5 and 7 syllables. Marie did not lead him along the path of the beautiful at all. Baudelaire smoked opium, and in Brussels he began to drink to excess. He suffered a massive stroke in 1866, and paralysis followed. And after more than a year of aphasia, he received the last rites of the Catholic Church, and the final year of his life was spent in a semi-paralyzed state in various maisons de santé in Brussels and in Paris, where he died on the 31st of August, 1867. La Vie Antérieure, Duparc's song, was composed in 1884, and it's his final song. It seems to me extraordinary that after this great song, such flaming genius should compose no more for almost half a century. He describes this song, or rather Massenet describes it. He says, English first, better to have created but one work like that than a large and imperfect œuvre. Mieux vaut n'avoir fait qu'une chose comme celle-là, plutôt qu'une œuvre nombreuse et imparfaite. We turn to Sally Beamish. 4 songs from Hafez. They were composed in 2007, settings of the great Persian poet in an English translation by Yila Peacock, commissioned by Leeds Leader, indeed, and first performed by Mark Padmore and Roger Vignoles at the Leeds College of Music in 2007. The music of all 4 songs, Nightingale, Peacock, Fish, and Hoopoe, attempt to convey the characteristic of each creature. Sally Beamish herself has explained the gestation of these charming songs. Excuse me. I wrote to her for a bit of help, and she very kindly provided this commentary. I chose these texts after seeing Yila Peacock's extraordinary book, 10 Poems from Hafez, in which the whole, you can get them on e-books, but they're incredibly expensive. They're really beautiful. In which the whole Persian text of each poem has been designed in the shape of the animal mentioned by Hafez in the text and set alongside a new English translation by the artist. In other words, they are calligrams, familiar to us from some of Poulenc's melodies. I don't know whether you know Il pleut. The rain is depicted vertically going down the page. The music attempts, she goes on, to create the mood of each poem. The first, Nightingale, is set against an ostinato accompaniment, and the second, Peacock, created almost entirely from falling motives. The third poem, Fish, is directly inspired by an Iranian motive, which develops into fast-flowing, breathless semiquavers, and Hoopoe uses the bird's call as a refrain throughout, with the piano repeating paragraphs of intensifying chords. We turn to Hugo Wolf. 2 songs are being sung. I shall talk about one very briefly. When he embarked on his Goethe-Lieder, he was well aware of the gargantuan task confronting him. How could he do justice to the depth and range of Germany's greatest poet, and how dare he invite comparisons with the greatest Goethe-Lieder by Reichard, Zelter, Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Löwe, and others. Although he did not shirk the challenge, there are 10 Wilhelm Meister settings, for example, he cleverly cast his net wide for poems that had not previously attracted composers. Thus it was that he was drawn to 17 poems from the Westöstlicher Divan, which we were talking about earlier this afternoon. Almost none of these poems had ever been set to music. Phänomen had, in a setting by Brahms, and the one we're going to hear in a minute had also been said, Erschaffen und Beleben. I love this poem and the song. It traces, with typical Goethean irreverence, the course of Adam's life from birth to death. The poem ends in crapulous merriment, and in Vol's postlude, we hear the exuberant clinking of glasses as we are led off into the promised land. Eleanor Alberger, her The Soul's Expression was commissioned with funds from the Performing Rights Society for the Music Foundation, Women Make Music. And this gave Alberger the idea of using all female poets, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, George Eliot, and Emily Bronte. Let's just have a quick look at the poets. George Eliot. It opens, I love this work too, I don't know whether you know it, you can get a recording of it. Blue Wings, the poem was also set by Charles Villiers Stanford in his 8 songs from the Spanish Gypsy. The image of blue wings melting away suggests both the attraction and the elusive nature of happiness. It comes from near the beginning of the Spanish Gypsy, a verse drama of Eliot that was published in 1868, and the plot revolves around Fedelma, who rejects a noble and devoted lover to carry out the role decreed by her dying father, that of a gypsy princess and mother to her people. The idea for the work came to the composer, she said, while she and her husband, George, were on holiday in Venice, and she was struck by a Titian painting of the Annunciation. I quote, "A young maiden, believing herself to be on the eve of the chief event of her life, marriage, about to share in the ordinary lot of womanhood, full of young hope, has suddenly announced to her that she is chosen to fulfill a great destiny, entailing a terribly different experience from that of ordinary womanhood." The poem Roses expresses the desire for the ordinary to become extraordinary, a common theme in Victorian poetry, which often sought to elevate the quotidian, the everyday, into something special. All 4 movements of the soul's expression feature a quotation from Eliot's Adam Bede. And the quotation occurs in Book 1, Chapter 5. "Let evil words die as soon as they are spoken." They're spoken in the novel by the Reverend Adolphus Irwin to Joshua Rann, the shoemaker, who has come to the rector to complain about the Methodist wheelwright Will Maskery, who's got, quote, tongue enough to speak disrespectful about neighbors, especially the Reverend Irwin himself, who Maskery has branded a dumb dog and an idle shepherd. The Reverend Irwin's reply is spoken with tolerance. "There is no need for me to take action against Will Maskery's slander. His evil words will die, will soon be forgotten." So what you're going to hear in each movement is "let evil words die as soon as they are spoken." And then we turn to Emily Bronte, I think a greater poet. When Emily's older sister Charlotte wrote to the English poet laureate Robert Southey, requesting him to advise her about writing, she received this withering reply. "Literature cannot be the business of a woman, and it ought not to be. The more she is engaged in her proper duties, the less leisure she will have for it, even as an accomplishment and a recreation. To those duties you have not yet been called, and when you are, you will be less eager for celebrity. 3 years before Emily's death, Charlotte discovered her younger sister's poems and arranged for a joint publication, poems by Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, which was published in 1846 and ignored by the critics. Emily was the most solitary of the sisters. Unlike Charlotte, she had no close friends, and she created with Anne the imaginary world of Gondal. The sun has set, the song we're going to hear, is typical of much of her verse and describes a lonely landscape familiar to us from Wuthering Heights. And then Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her song, her poem called The Soul's Expression, gives the title to this work. It doesn't form part of the sonnets from the Portuguese, some of which have been wonderfully set by Libby Larsen. It is, however, a sonnet, and one of the themes is clear, and the same as in Kerner's Stille Liebe, this wonderful song by Schumann. I don't know whether you remember the opening. Könnt ich dich in Liedern preisen, säng ich dir das längste Lied. If I could praise you in song, I'd sing you the longest song. And the rest of the poem deals with how difficult, how impossible it is to write such a poem. Compare that with the beginning of Barrett Browning's The Soul's Expression. With stammering lips and insufficient sound, I strive and struggle to deliver right that music of my nature, day and night. And the beginning of the second verse, this song of soul I struggle to outbear through portals of the sense, sublime and whole. The poem then explores the difficulty of communication and self-expression. It's a testament to the power of poetry to connect us not just with our own souls, but with the souls of others. The poem is also a reminder of how crucial communication is in our lives. And because this is about exoticism, this recital, there's something wonderfully exotic about Browning's elopement with Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Robert wrote her this letter on the 10th of January, 1845, confessing, I love your verses with all my heart, Miss Barrett, and this is no offhand complimentary letter that I shall write. I do, as I say, love these books with all my heart, and I love you too. If my poetry is worth anything, so she resolutely declined to receive Browning, but he persevered. There is nothing to see in me, she said. If my poetry is worth anything in any eyes, it is the flower of me. But she eventually allowed him to visit her in Wimpole Street on the 20th of May, 1845. They were married secretly on the 12th of September, 1846, in the St. Marylebone Church. Elizabeth was dressed in nun-like black and wore a gold ring, which she took off after the ceremony and hid on the return journey to Wimpole Street. At the age of 40, she eloped with Robert on the 19th of September for the milder clime of Italy. The version of the Soul's Expression, of course, we will hear for baritone and piano, but it was composed at the same time as the string orchestral version. And finally, Harry Thacker Burleigh, the black American composer and singer. He was born in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1866. His mother was the daughter of a slave, Hamilton Waters, who was discarded by his Maryland owners when he became blind. His grandfather used to sing spirituals to Harry as he led him through the streets of Erie. Having graduated from high school, he became well established as a singer in the Episcopal Church, from where, with the help of a scholarship, he was able to study at the National Conservatory of Music in New York City. Apart from his vocal studies, he played the double bass and timpani in the conservatory under Anton Dvorak, for whom he played such melodies as Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, which is mirrored in the second theme of the first movement of the New World Symphony. By all accounts, Burley had a fine baritone voice and sang in a variety of languages, including Hebrew, Latin, Italian, French, and German. While pursuing his vocal activities, he coached many famous singers, including Caruso, Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson, and Paul Robeson. He also continued to compose and arrange, and when friends encouraged him to publish Deep River in 1917, his fame soon spread. Less well known are the songs we're going to hear. The 5 songs of Lawrence Hope. It's neat programming to have more Lawrence Hope, but they're a delight. Published in 1915, they are, with their exotic themes, the perfect way to end this recital and to end this little talk. Let me just quote one of them. He also sets a Kashmiri song, but we've heard that already. So here is this poem just to end. It's called Till I Wake. When I am dying, lean over me tenderly, softly, stoop as the yellow roses droop in the wind from the south, so I may, when I wake, if there be an awakening, keep what lulled me to sleep, the touch of your lips on my mouth. Thank you.